Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana Jamuna Tira Banachari Jamuna Tira Banachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayam Vishnupad Paramhansa Paribrajakacharya Stotara Satyashi Shrimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Arigor Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Samaveda Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Today we're continuing the reading of Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, Volume 2. Srila Prabhupada now has been almost 1 month at the Bowery. And we're hearing now, because the attendance has improved immensely, doubled and tripled, since when Prabhupada lived up on the upper west side, where all the rich people live. Now he's amongst the young people, the musicians and the artists, and it's just where they need him. So they're coming to his classes Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And this part that we'll be reading today, there are a lot of interviews from some of the students who are coming to hear Prabhupada's classes and how he affected their lives. The first one is a young woman named Carol Becker. Now, we heard about Carl Jurgens last week. He was a professor. He was from a part of New York City called the Bronx, which is way high up. There's Lower East Side, then there's the Uptown where Prabhupada was, then above that is the Bronx. And on the other side is Brooklyn, and then there's a little island called Staten Island. There are 5 different suburbs of New York City. Huge place. Millions of people. At that time, about 12 million people lived in that one city. So Carl, he was living just nearby with his girlfriend. In those days and in that culture, there was very little marriage going on. It was called common law marriage, where the boyfriend and girlfriend lived together without any responsibility. So Carol, this woman, Carol, she was 20 years old, and she was the girlfriend of Carl's brother. And she also lived there in the same neighborhood. So this is what Carol says. This is an introduction to her. Carol Becker came from an immigrant Catholic background. Well, everyone in America was an immigrant because the only people who lived in America were the native Indians. So everyone came from Europe and Asia and different places. And particularly the Catholics came, because in England and other places, Catholicism was kicked out. Because the king, in Catholicism, you're not allowed to divorce. And one of the kings wanted to divorce his wife, so he kicked out the Catholics and he made his own church called the Church of England. So a lot of Catholics got on the boat and came to America to practice their religion. That's why in America you have states like Maryland. The Catholics lived there. And a lot of the Catholics from the British Isles like Ireland and Scotland and England, they especially came. So she was from that kind of background. And amazingly, a sociologist, he did an interview, a sociological, it was a thesis, actually, that of all of the Hare Krishna devotees in America, from which background do most of them come? And the highest percentage was the Catholics, because in Catholic religion, they believe that God is a person. He's the Father, and that Jesus is the Son. And there's a Holy Ghost, which is what we have, like the super soul. So it was very easy for Catholics to understand Prabhupada's concept that there was a God, and he had a kingdom, and we should all go back to the kingdom of God by chanting the names of God, because this is also what the Catholics practice. If any of you have ever gone to Catholic schools, they'll teach you the same things. So the highest percentage was Catholics amongst the American Hare Krishnas, and then after that was the Jews, because they have a very strong religious culture. So Carol, later we'll hear her name again, because she was so much impressed by Prabhupada that she was one of the principal signers when Prabhupada established the International Society for Krishna Consciousness just 2 months from now. We're in May of 1966, and Prabhupada established ISKCON in July. So she came from an immigrant Catholic background, and she immediately associated with Catholicism the Swami's presence as a spiritual authority and his devotional practices of chanting on beads and reciting from Sanskrit scriptures. Because the Catholics, they have their rosaries, they chant Hail Mary, they chant the names of Jesus' mother, and they also read in Greek and in Latin ancient books that are translated into different languages of the world, just like we have the Bhagavad-Gita in Sanskrit. Sometimes she would accompany Prabhupada to nearby Chinatown. We have a picture here of Chinatown. Chinatown was just around the corner, and it was just like you were walking into China. All the signs are even in Chinese. And that's where all of the Chinese immigrants came to live. You could go there. We used to go there because they had vegetarian things. Prabhupada would go there for that reason, because they had Asian vegetables. You could get loki, you could get karilla, all things that Americans don't even know exist, but the Chinese had all those things. She would accompany Prabhupada to nearby Chinatown, where he would purchase ingredients for his cooking. He would cook daily, and sometimes Carol and others would come by to learn the secrets of cooking for Lord Krishna. Now Carol explains. He used to cook with us in the kitchen, and he was always aware of everyone else's activities in addition to his own cooking. He knew exactly how things should be. He washed everything and made sure everyone did everything correctly. He was a teacher. We used to make chapatis by hand, because Prabhupada didn't have a balan, so he taught them how to make by hand. But then one day he asked me to get him a rolling pin. I brought my rolling pin, that's a balan, And he appropriated it. He took it. He took it from her. He put some men on rolling chapatis and supervised them very carefully. So we're hearing mostly about Prabhupada's Bhagavad-Gita classes, but now Carol is telling us about another type of classes Prabhupada was giving. He was teaching all of these young students also how to cook vegetarian, because as was described by one of the other students, the only vegetarian restaurant they had was the Paradox, and that was macrobiotic. Macrobiotic is very bland. Brown rice, zucchini. Zucchini is like, you get it here, zucchini they call it. It's like Loki. Some beans, like kidney beans or something like that, and they would sprinkle some sesame, some teal on top. That was it. One course meal, that was all you could get. And that was what they thought being vegetarian was. And Prabhupada was teaching them so many wonderful recipes, and the girls especially were interested. Carol said she was the first amongst the girls to come to learn. I made a chutney for him at home. He always accepted our gifts graciously, although I don't think he ever ate them. Even when I used to cook for Prabhupada here, people would bring Prabhupada so many things, and he would send them into the kitchen, but he would never ask for them. So I would just distribute them to the devotees. But one thing he would take. And just on the other side, right now we have the Kirtan Ashram on the Parikrama Marg. And that whole area where Agrasen Dharmshala is, and there's the Bhakti-yoga Ashram and the Kirtan Ashram next to Banbihar Ashram. That whole area was owned by an ex-MP named Seth Bishanchand. And his wife was a wonderful cook. And whatever the season was of vegetables, she would make achar. And she would have 20 different kinds of achar. And you know, with achar, the longer you make it, the longer you keep it, the better it is. So she would have 10-year, 20-year black nimbu achar. And have kartal, jackfruit achar, all different kinds of achar, carrot achar. So she would send those achars to Prabhupada. And that Prabhupada would take, because he knew that she was doing everything sattvic. They were Vaishnavas. So he would take, if he knew that the person was a Vaishnava, then he would take. But these young girls, he didn't know what they were doing at their home. That's why he would watch them very carefully. Perhaps he was worried we might put in something that wasn't allowed in his diet. He used to take things from me and put them in the cupboard. I don't know what he finally did with them, but I am sure he didn't throw them away. I never saw him eat anything that I had prepared, although he accepted everything. He might have given it to other people to eat. Prabhupada held his evening meetings on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Friday, just as he had uptown. The loft was out of the way for most of his acquaintances, who were going to his classes from Dr. Mishra's class, the yoga studio there. And it was on the Bowery, Bowery being the worst slum in all of New York City, where all the drunkards lived. A cluster of sleeping derelicts regularly blocked the street-level entrance, and visitors would find as many as half a dozen bums to step over before climbing the 4 flights of stairs. But it was something new. You could go and sit with a group of hip people and watch the Swami lead kirtan. The room was dimly lit, and Prabhupada would burn incense. Many casual visitors came and went. One of them, his name was Gunter, had vivid impressions. So this is what Gunter has to say. You walked right off the Bowery into a room filled with incense. It was quiet. Everyone was talking in hushed tones, not really talking at all. Swamiji was sitting in the front of the room and in meditation. There was a tremendous feeling of peace which I have never had before. I'd happened to have studied for 2 years to become a minister and was into meditation, study, and prayer. But this was my first time to do anything Eastern or Hindu. There were lots of pillows around and mats on the floor for people to sit on. I don't think there were any pictures or statues. It was just Swamiji, incense, and mats, and obviously the respect of the people in the room for him. Before we went up, because Gunther was a friend of Karl, and Karl had brought Gunther. Karl, because he was a scholar, a professor, he had many friends, and also he tried to help organizations of young people to become established. So he had a lot of connections, and he would encourage his friends and associates to come to Prabhupada's classes. Before we went up, Karl was laughing and saying how Swami wanted everyone to use the hand symbols just correctly. Ching, 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 ching. Just that one, that was the only, what's it called? Tal, that Prabhupada taught us. I had never played the symbols before, but when it began, I just tried to follow Swamiji, who was doing it in a certain way. Things were building up. The sound was building up. But then someone was doing it wrong. And Swamiji just very, very calmly shook a finger at someone, and they looked. And then everything stopped. Prabhupada stopped the kirtan. He instructed this person from a distance, and this fellow got the right idea, and they started up again. After a few minutes, the sound of the cymbals and the incense, we weren't in the Bowery any longer. We started chanting Hare Krishna. That was my first experience in chanting. I'd never chanted before. There's nothing in Protestant religion. So the Protestants, that's another form of Christianity, and they were the ones who broke off from the Catholics. Just as what that king had done in England, that was a Protestant. They protested against Catholicism, so they were called Protestants. And Gunther, he had been studying to become a minister, a Protestant minister. And they don't have things like chanting and meditation, the Protestants. So he had never experienced anything like that before, whereas the Catholics, they could understand all of that. There's nothing in Protestant religion that comes even close to that. Maybe Catholics with their Hail Marys, but it's not quite the same thing. It was relaxing and very interesting to be able to chant, and I found Swamiji very fascinating. The loft was more open than Prabhupada's previous place uptown, so there was less privacy. And here some of the visitors were skeptical and even challenging. But everyone found him confident and joyful. We have to remember Prabhupada was on a mission. And even when he first stepped foot in America, when he wrote his poem, he said, I don't know why you've sent me here. How will these people be able to understand your message? So he was, even Prabhupada was skeptical at that point in the very beginning, that how will these people understand the message of Krishna consciousness? And he was meeting that skepticism and challenging, especially amongst the young people, because Bhagavad-Gita, Arjuna, he didn't want to, he was a peaceful person, he didn't want to fight. And Krishna's telling him, no, I want you to fight. You do it for me. And some of the young people objected to the Bhagavad-Gita for that reason. And Prabhupada had to explain to them, and we'll hear Prabhupada's rationale, his reasoning, how he was able to convince people that it's not a question of peace and war, it's a question of what Krishna wants us to do. So Prabhupada had a lot to teach these young people. He seemed to have far-reaching plans, and he had dedication. He knew what he wanted to do and was single-handedly carrying it out. But Prabhupada says, it is not a one-man's job. But he went on doing all he could, depending on Krishna for the results. David was beginning to help, and more people were coming by to visit him. So I'll go back to the beginning because we'll just catch up a little bit. Here we're at the end of April when Prabhupada is now formally turning over the keys of his room there at 72nd Street. Today I met Pitcher is the owner of that room where Prabhupada was staying uptown. I met Pitcher's secretary for informing the vacating of room. She promised the check because she was going to return the deposit. You always have to give a 1-month deposit when you do a rental in case you overstay. Or if you've broken something, then they detract the money from that. On Tuesday afternoon, so this is a Friday, the 29th, deposited with the bank $17. Talked with Banerjee, he has not yet sent the report. Talked with Bogart. Banerjee he was helping him with the newspapers. Talked with Bogart. Mr. Bogart was helping him with trying to get a publisher for his books. No news. In the evening, there was meeting, 5 gentlemen attended, contribution $14. It means Prabhupada must have sold some books. Saturday, the 30th of April, it was Ekadasi. Today, both Paul and self observed Ekadasi. In the afternoon, we both went to Ananda Ashram because it was a Saturday, and Dr. Mishra needed Prabhupada to lead the kirtans. Expenditure $5. We passed the night at Ananda. Sunday, May 1st. Now there's a lot of change. May was a very tumultuous month for Prabhupada. At the end of May is when Paul came to attack Prabhupada and he had to flee. And this whole month of May, Prabhupada is just building the momentum with more and more people coming to his classes. He'll start the Sanskrit classes, he'll have the cooking classes, he'll have his first Sunday love feast. So a lot happened in this month. And then, bam, Krishna stopped everything and moved him to 22nd Avenue in June. We came back from Ananda Ashram at 6:30 in the evening. Expenditure 30 cents. That means they went down to the Bowery. Paul was not at home at night. He went for work. Maybe Paul had some nighttime job. He would go at night and then come back in the morning. Monday, May 2nd. Today I did not go out the whole day. I was engaged with my typewriter. Paul came back from work at about 10:30 a.m. and deposited with me $25 for rent. So the Prabhupada and Paul, they were sharing the rent that they had to pay to Harvey Cohen. There was no expenditure. So Prabhupada here, he had such a good arrangement because he was able to cook. He had a shower there, he could bathe, he had toilet. He didn't have to depend on walking 7 blocks just to take a bath. Everything was just in that one big loft. So he could sit the whole day and work at his typewriter doing his translations without any disturbance at all. Being a Monday, in the evening there was meeting, only 5 gentlemen attended, including Paul, and contribution was $5. Mr. Carl brought his tape recorder. The appearance gorgeous, but action is very poor. It did not act to my satisfaction. So we know that Prabhupada's tape recorder and typewriter were both stolen. And meanwhile, people are giving Prabhupada tape recorders and typewriters left and right now. He just has to choose which one he wants. Tuesday, May 3rd. Today I delivered the keys of 72nd House to the secretary of the landlord at 33 Riverside Drive. She returned $35 in terms of my registered notice. so the account of 100 West 72nd Street now closed. I also handed over to Dr. Mishra the keys of the Studio 501. He had invited me to dine with him on Friday, the 6th instant. The Paragon Book Gallery man, Mr. Max, met. Now, in the very beginning, when Prabhupada first came to New York, if you remember, Prabhupada was having Sally Agarwal ship sets of books, 25 sets at a time, to the Paragon bookshop. And they were keeping all of those sets of books in the bookshop and selling them because it was an Oriental bookshop. They had a lot of Chinese books there, books from the Orient. So they had customers who were interested in Prabhupada's books, and they were selling nicely. And Prabhupada himself would take the books from Paragon Bookshop. He reported that they are selling the books. Paul was paid expenditure $2 and subway and bus fare 45 cents. Wednesday, May 4th. Today I went to search out Sakar, but I was lost in the subway. Now, there's no way you can imagine. We've heard of the subterranean planets, right? We know that there are 14 planetary systems, and Earth is a middle planet, and then there are the heavenly planets. Well, in New York City, they have subterranean planets, up to 3 stories underground of subways. And the subway system is so complicated that you can actually get lost. And when I used to do Sankirtan in New York City, we would go down into the subways, and we would, like a subway is like a train. We would make announcements, we're serving out free food, please take some. We would make Simply Wonderfuls, little laddus. We'd hand them out to all the people in the train and give out books, and the people would buy the books. And I would meet people who lived underground in the subways. That's how, it's just like a subterranean planet. They slept in the subways. They would go out and buy things, you know, from different, they have these vending machines. They would put money in and get the food. And one man I met, he was telling me how he lived in the subways. For years he had been living in the subways. Never went out, because once you put your money in and you're in there, you can travel for the rest of your life all over New York City in these subways. And it's not that New York City is so big that you go to one part, then you have to get off, go upstairs, take another subway, go on that level, then go upstairs again, take another subway. When we lived in the part of New York called Staten Island, we would have to take a boat, then we would have to take one subway through Manhattan, then we would have to transfer, take another subway to Brooklyn, and you could get lost. So that's what happened to poor Srila Prabhupada. He went into the subways and he got lost. He couldn't find his way how to get home, because he was used to taking the buses. The buses, you're out on the, you can see, there's sunlight, but not in the subways. It's all underground. Paul paid for expenditure and for his laundry $2, deposited with the bank $70 because Prabhupada got his deposit back. In the evening, the meeting was held. It was nice. 7 gentlemen attended. Contribution received $6.75. Mr. Carl was very kind to give me over the tape recorder, which is better than the one I have lost. 2 stamps given to Paul. This is Prabhupada walking in the Bowery area. Thursday, Pratipat received one redirected letter from Prabhupada's son, Vrindavan. I have already replied his former letter. He appears to be very much anxious about me always. Vrindavan always remained attached to Prabhupada. He was the only son who would come to visit Prabhupada. Up until the last, when Prabhupada was here, preparing for Samadhi. Up until the last 2 weeks, Vrindavan Chandra Day came to see Prabhupada. Prabhupada assured him that in his will, he had taken care of all of his children and his wife to make sure they would get a monthly pension from ISKCON. And that continued up until the lifespan of all of the family members. Now, Vrindavan has recently gone back to Godhead. Sunrise Friday. Today I did not go out. Again, Prabhupada was able to spend the whole day translating. In the evening there was meeting, and the contribution collected was $5. So Prabhupada's meetings are quite regular now, and numbers are increasing. We'll see. Up to 12 people were coming sometimes. Saturday was the days that Prabhupada was giving his Sanskrit. In the afternoon there was meeting again for teaching Sanskrit, and contribution collection was $6.75. So the students who were coming, 5, sometimes 10 students were coming to Sanskrit. They were also giving donations for those classes. Prabhupada was training them that when you come to take knowledge, you should also give a donation. And they accepted that. I went to Ananda Ashram, being Saturday. The expenditure was $250. In the Ananda Ashram, they paid for 2 trips, $5. Tonight, Kirtan was very much appreciated by all in the Ananda Ashram. Mr. Bill Epstein, he was one of the waiters who worked at Paradox Restaurant, and it was he who would tell all of the customers at the Paradox to go to Prabhupada's classes. So he wanted to read Prabhupada's Back to Godhead magazines, and Prabhupada loaned them to him, his office copies. They weren't magazines, they were newspapers. It's 4-page newspapers. No, it wasn't until Gargamuni, Prabhupada, we'll read about it. Prabhupada got machines, and Gargamuni was doing the printing and stapling and making them into magazines at that time. 26 2nd Avenue, about 4 months from now. Sunday, May 8th. I came back to 94 Bowery on the car of George because he was brought back from the Ananda Ashram on Sundays. There was no expenditure. Monday, May 9th. I paid Paul $1 for expenses. The whole day I did not go out. 2 letters received. One from Govinda Maharaj. Govinda Maharaj was the secretary of Tirtha Maharaj. And Prabhupada had stopped writing to Govinda Maharaj because he wasn't getting any proper response or any action from Govinda Maharaj. Prabhupada had started writing to Tirtha Maharaj directly, but Tirtha Maharaj also, although he said he would help, he never carried through and never helped Prabhupada. And another from Chokshi of Bombay. That was, Mr. Chokshi was the secretary of Sumati Morarji, refusing Paul's free passage. So this is what the letter says, dated May 5th. Respected Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami, I am directed by Srimati Sumati Morarji to acknowledge receipt of your letter dated 27/4/66. She is very much pleased to know your activities at New York. As regards passage to India, she regrets it will not be possible for her to accede to your request to issue passage in favor of the boy to whom you propose to bring to India. Free passage will be issued in your favor only. With pranams, yours sincerely, I am Chokshi. So Prabhupada was now receiving his letters at 94 Bowery, although some letters were still coming to 72nd Street and they were being redirected to him. So this was the end of Prabhupada's plan to bring Paul to India to learn more about Krishna consciousness. In the evening there was meeting. The attendance was large. 14 ladies and gentlemen attended. But the collection poor, only $5. Never mind, it is growing. Today, Mr. Carl has taken a copy of the Memorandum of Association of the League of Devotees for consultation. He has also taken away a pair of symbols for checking in the market, because Prabhupada, he wanted to increase the number of, so that everyone could take part in the kirtans. He didn't care what type of instruments they all brought, but he wanted the classical instruments. He wanted to get mridanga, he wanted to have kartals, he wanted harmonium. So he was trying to get those things from India, but then Carl offered that, let me try and see if they're available anywhere, something close to it. For instance, Prabhupada, he didn't bring a mridanga with him. So he was using, it's like, what are those, you know, those ones that Lord Shiva's people play? What are they called? Tamru? Damru. Yes, the damru. So in America they had a one-sided damru called a bongo drum. So Prabhupada would just play on one side like that. But since he knew mridanga, he was able to play the things very nicely anyway. So whatever he could find to replace mridanga and kartals, they had these little finger cymbals. You attach them to your fingers and you play them like that. So whatever the students could find, they were bringing to play along with Prabhupada. Tuesday, May 10th. Today also did not go out. So Prabhupada, it means he has everything he needs in that room. He has no reason to go out. And he is determined to get his Bhagavad-Gita ready for printing. 2 letters received, one from Robert Nelson, who tried Harper Row for publication. Now, Harper Row now is in India. It's called HarperCollins. And they print many, many interesting books all about Indian culture. So Robert Nelson, who was trying to help Prabhupada both with getting a record of Prabhupada's kirtans made and getting Prabhupada's books published, he was going to the publishing houses. And he felt that this Harper Row would be a good choice, but they refused, unfortunately. Received back the old passbook. So now Prabhupada, because Prabhupada's very careful, we see he down to the paisa, down to the penny, he keeps accounts. So he had opened an account in the uptown with one bank, I think it was called the Grand Bank, and now he's getting that account transferred to the Bowery branch. Transferred to Grand Street, Prabhupada had $109.87 from his book sales and his donations. Paul paid $1 for expenditure, 2 letters written, one to Vrindavan and the other to Captain Pandya. Both Vrindavan and Captain Pandya written about kol, kartal, and harmonium. So what Prabhupada's plan was that because Vrindavan lived in Calcutta, and Prabhupada knew that the boat started from Calcutta, the Jaladuta, Prabhupada was writing to ask Vrindavan to get the musical instruments and keep them with Scindia steam lines. And he asked Captain Pandya that next time you're in Calcutta, you please bring these on the ship to New York City so I can get them. And that way Prabhupada was trying to get exporting through the Jaladuta with Captain Pandya. Wednesday, May 11th. Paragon people are hopeless. I guess they weren't doing so many book sales, where Prabhupada was selling a lot. They cannot sell books, so some arrangement has to be done. Now, what finally happened was, when Prabhupada moved to 26 2nd Avenue in about a month or two, when the devotees started really becoming serious, like Brahmananda and Gargamuni and Satsvarup and others, so Gargamuni and other devotees, they would go personally to all the bookshops, because they knew they were from New York. They knew where to go. And they would put the books into the bookshops. And that would save Prabhupada from trying to go this place, that place, the other place. Because the New York young boys, they were able to do it. And they would go, they would pick up the money, and they would drop off more books and get the books and things like that. They were doing all of the footwork for Prabhupada. So the Prabhupada could just sit and work on his translations. One letter received from Chandra Chekar, that was Prabhupada's assistant in New Delhi. 2 sets of books taken by 2 gentlemen. They will pay by installment. One of them paid $5. In the evening there was meeting. Discussed with Carl about LSD. He is convinced about my arguments that there is no necessity of it for spiritual revelation. There were 9 or 10 ladies, gentlemen, attending today's meeting. Contribution $8. So as Prabhupada said, the numbers were increasing. It's not that he was so concerned about the contributions, but the fact that the number of people, it means that they were getting more and more attracted, and they were coming steadily. These people were actually hearing Prabhupada. They were enjoying the kirtans, of course, but the philosophy was going in, because we'll read later about what Prabhupada's schedule was for his classes. It was 2 hours, and we'll read about that. I saw the Bowery branch, this is the name of the bank, First City National Bank. They have transferred the amount from 72nd branch. Deposited today $15, income $13, expenditure $17.30. 2 letters posted through Paul. So even he wouldn't have to go to the post office. Paul would do that service for him. He would buy the stamps, Prabhupada would write the letters, or he would use the aerograms, and Paul would take those letters to the post office for Prabhupada. Okay, we'll read a little bit more here now. Almost all of Prabhupada's Bowery friends were musicians or friends of musicians. They were into music, drugs, women, and spiritual meditation. Because Prabhupada's presentation of the Hare Krishna mantra was both musical and meditative, they were automatically interested. Prabhupada stressed that all of the Vedic mantras, or hymns, were sung. In fact, the words Bhagavad-Gita meant the song of God. But the words of the Vedic hymns were incarnations of God in the form of transcendental sound. The musical accompaniment of hand cymbals, drum, and harmonium was just that, an accompaniment, and had no spiritual purpose independent of the chanting of the name of God. Prabhupada allowed any instrument to be used as long as it did not detract from the chanting. Now, for instance, today we're going to start incorporating, because Mukunda Das Goswami, one of Prabhupada's first disciples when Prabhupada gave the first initiation, his name then was Michael Grant. Prabhupada used to call him Mr. Michael. So he met Prabhupada at this time. He'll be introduced on the next page. One serious newcomer was Michael Grant. And Mukunda Das Goswami, he took the time to write this wonderful book, Miracle on 2nd Avenue. But actually his story begins on the Bowery with Srila Prabhupada. And he was a musician. He was from a part of America called Portland, Oregon. It's way on the other side of the country, above California. New York is on the Atlantic Ocean side, and Oregon is on the Pacific Ocean side. Now he was a musician, he played the piano and many other instruments, and he thought that he wanted to, because his parents had died, he had got an inheritance, and he thought, let me try to become a professional musician in New York City. So he and his girlfriend happened to be the sister of Jamuna Devi Dasi, who is the famous devotee. Her samadhi is here in Vrindavan. So her sister's name was Jan, and she was the girlfriend of Michael, or Mukunda. Jan also became initiated. Her name was Janaki, and Prabhupada got them married, and they did so much service for Prabhupada in New York, and then in San Francisco, and then in London for opening up the temples. So Michael, he wrote this book, and we'll start hearing the corresponding excerpts from what Satsvarup Maharaj is saying in his book, Prabhupada Lilamrita, and what Mukunda is experiencing in his association with Srila Prabhupada. Because Satsvarup Maharaj was not present in the Bowery, and Michael Mukunda was. So today, if we have time, we'll start hearing Mukunda's description, along with Satsvarup Maharaj's. Now Carol is speaking again, Carol Beaker. It was a very interracial, that means there were people from all different races, from backgrounds, black, white, yellow, red, music-oriented scene. There were a few professional musicians, that was such as Mukunda, and a lot of people who enjoyed playing or just listening. Some people were painting in some of the lofts, and that's basically what was going on. Because we had heard that the government, when all these factories moved out of the Bowery area, and all of these huge lofts were then empty, the government decided to rent these lofts to the young artists and musicians called AIR, Artists in Residence. And that was the type of loft that Prabhupada was living in. And all around the Bowery, there were these young musicians and artists. So it was just a perfect setup for Prabhupada, because they were into music and meditation, so they would come to Prabhupada's kirtans and classes. We had memorable kirtans. One time there was a beautiful ceremony. Some of us went over early to prepare for it. That was the love feast. There must have been 100 people who came that day. For the Bowery crowd, sound was spirit, and spirit was sound, in a merging of music and meditation. But for Prabhupada, music without the name of God wasn't meditation. It was sense gratification, or at most a kind of stylized, impersonal meditation. But he was glad to see the musicians coming to play along in his kirtans, to hear him and to chant responsively. Some, having stayed up all night playing somewhere on their instruments, for instance, Michael, when he came to, he had this dream that he would go to New York City and become a famous musician. But when he got there to New York, he was just getting jobs in nightclubs, and he'd have to play all types of commercial songs. And he wasn't at all inspired with his lifestyle there. If you work in a nightclub, it means you start at 9 o'clock at night and you finish at 3 o'clock in the morning. He would get home at 4 in the morning and have to sleep all day. So it wasn't a happy lifestyle. Although he went with very high hopes, it became very depressing for him, actually. But when he met Prabhupada, he was able to play his music to spiritual sound vibrations, so that gave a different dimension to his life. But he was glad to see, yes, some, having stayed up all night playing somewhere on their instruments, would come by in the morning and sing with the Swami, because Prabhupada also had Srimad Bhagavatam class in the morning. He did not dissuade them from their focus on sound. Rather, he gave them sound. In the Vedas, sound is said to be the first element of material creation. The source of sound is God, and God is eternally a person. Prabhupada's emphasis was on getting people to chant God's personal, transcendental names. Whether they took it as jazz, folk music, rock, or Indian meditation made no difference, as long as they began to chant Hare Krishna. So also later in the Krishna Consciousness Society, musicians were joining, and they had their stylized way of singing. They didn't sing the same tunes and the same ragas that Prabhupada taught us. For instance, we have our morning tune that we sing at Mangalarti, and there are other tunes that we learn for singing the bhajans. So they kind of modernized the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, and they started using guitars and different types of modern musical instruments. Prabhupada didn't discourage it. He taught us the Vedic system. He liked us to use those ragas that he taught us. But for those who were musically inclined, he didn't stop them. And that was the glory in how Prabhupada was so successful. Because later, when these 6 devotees went to London and they met the Beatles, particularly George Harrison, they got world fame by George Harrison producing the Radha Krishna Temple album, where they sang Hare Krishna with all types of musical accompaniment, modern things, and wonderful music. And the devotees were then, they became famous all over the whole world by associating with the Beatles. And then George Harrison himself, he produced so many songs about Krishna. My Sweet My Sweet Lord. It was the top of the music world for months and months. And all the young people heard it. And all throughout My Sweet Lord is the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, different names of God. And there are so many videos now with pictures of Krishna everywhere with George Harrison singing that. So Prabhupada was not narrow-minded. He understood that these people, they have a different culture, they have different musical instruments, they have different tunes, they come from so many different countries, they have different ways of dancing, but he allowed them to use all those cultural differences in Krishna's service, although he never compromised. And he taught us the proper ways to sing, which we still do in our temples. He encouraged that, particularly in Vrindavan and his other major temples. Okay. Carol, again, she's describing. Whenever we had the chanting, the people were fairly in awe of the Swami. On the Bowery, a kind of transcendence came out of the ringing of the cymbals. He used the harmonium. That was Robert Nelson. He had found a harmonium and given that as a gift. And many people played hand cymbals. Sometimes he played the drum. In the very beginning, he stressed the importance of sound and the realization of Godhead through sound. That was, I suppose, the attraction that these musicians found in him, the emphasis on sound as a means to attaining transcendence and the Godhead. But he wanted a serious thing. He was interested in discipleship. So during this time, the young people, they were using psychedelic drugs, trying to get a transcendental experience. And Prabhupada he spoke in his diary that he had a conversation with Carl, explaining that you don't need artificial intoxication for a spiritual experience. You can get that through sound vibration. And because these young people were interested in music and in sound, they accepted what Prabhupada said, and they had this transcendental sound vibration. We'll hear when Michael, he said that you would walk into Prabhupada's room, outside would be the drunkards lying on the staircases, and you would walk into the hallway, go up the 4 flights of steps, and you felt like you were in a beautiful pasture. You didn't even know you were in New York City anymore because of the sound vibrations. So they were getting that experience themselves. So now introducing Michael Grant. One serious newcomer was Michael Grant. Mike was 24. His father, who was Jewish, owned a record shop in Portland, Oregon, where Mike grew up. After studying music at Portland's Reed College and at San Francisco State University, Mike, who played the piano and many other instruments, moved to New York City along with his girlfriend, hoping to get into music professionally. But he quickly became disenchanted with the commercial music scene. Playing in nightclubs and pandering to commercial demands seemed particularly unappealing. In New York, he joined the Musicians' Union and worked as a musical arranger and as an agent for several local groups. So are we up to this? Yes, okay. We'll read a little bit here. The Swami, as Srila Prabhupada was known to the hip crowd who visited his Bowery loft, continued with his Monday, Wednesday, and Friday evening lectures on Bhagavad-Gita. He would begin punctually at 8 o'clock, and those who attended the full program would join him for half an hour of chanting Hare Krishna, followed by a lecture from Bhagavad-Gita, usually 45 minutes long, a question and answer period, and finally another half an hour of chanting, with everything ending by 10. Some of these evening programs Srila Prabhupada recorded on tape. Now you'll notice that all of the tapes that Prabhupada made that we have, there must be at least 1,700 or more, 2,400. They're always finding more and more tapes. They're all either half an hour long or 45 minutes long, because that's how much one tape could hold. And therefore, whenever Prabhupada would give his class, it would be either a half-hour class or a 45-minute class. And Prabhupada understood that we didn't have long attention spans because of our Kali Yuga brains. So he wouldn't give long classes, no longer than 45 minutes. Maximum 1 hour, but then it couldn't get all recorded on one tape. So that's one reason why this 45-minute time for the classes was there. And Prabhupada had a sandwich program in the sense that whenever he would do programs, there would first be kirtan, then Prabhupada would give the 45-minute class, then he would end with kirtan again. There would be question and answer period as well. Then another half an hour or so of kirtan, and then prasad distribution. It would always be 4 components to Prabhupada's program. And we still follow that. Whenever we go on college preaching programs, any type of programs, kirtan, lecture, kirtan, and prasad distribution. They all go together. All right, so now it's 7 o'clock. And we'll continue. Now that we're introducing Michael Grant's memories, we'll get double the amount of nectar from both Satsrup Maharaj and Mukunda Maharaj. Hare Krishna.